Well, welcome back to the Down the Road studio here at the Scott Learning Center. I'm Jay Mahaffey, host of our podcast today, and I got a couple of guests on the line this morning. We're going to have a little conversation about cotton and some of the things we need to be concerned about. So, good morning, gentlemen. Introduce yourselves to the world.
Good morning. My name is Eddie Beasley. I'm the technical agronomist for Bayer Crop Science, and basically my territory covers East Georgia from the mountains basically down to Miami, Florida, on the east side of the state of Florida as well.
Yeah, Jay, I'm Vint Hicks. I'm one of the other technical agronomists in that part of the world. I cover the part of Georgia that Eddie doesn't touch, Panhandle of Florida, basically southern part of Alabama.
Well, we're glad to have you all this morning. There's always something happening in cotton that everybody's concerned about or watching. It seems belt wide, but I think you guys have the newest issue that folks are watching today, and that's the Cotton Jassid. Before we get to that, Eddie's one of the people that I know that might love plant disease more than I do insects and maybe cotton. So, Eddie, before we get started, I want to ask you one question. What's your favorite plant disease and why?
Well, I guess I could say numerous diseases, but in cotton specifically, I worked on fusarium wilt during my PhD, so I've kind of got a soft spot for that disease just because it's very diverse and it can be very devastating in certain fields. So I'd say that's probably why it's my favorite disease.
Vint, you got a favorite disease or insect?
Oh, I don't know that I've got a favorite disease or insect, but the ones that kind of come to mind is, the whole heliothion complex. Obviously, spending all of our careers working in the boll arena. That'd probably be my favorite insect. I try to leave the disease part of the world to Eddie.
The reason I asked that question is, and y'all have seen parts of this, we filmed a bunch of videos last week, and they're still kind of prowling around the Cotton Belt filming videos for the 30th anniversary of Beauregard. And the film crew asked me in that process what my favorite insect was, and I happen to have a list. I know that's nerdy and all that, but my favorite insect is a velvet ant, family Butylidae. And Vint, you remember down in Florida last year when we were filming, we didn't get out of sight of a dozen of those things in some of those fields. And I still wonder what they're doing in the cotton field. So anyway, on to the next issue. We're talking about the Cotton Jassid. Tell me what the situation might be in y'all's territory.
Yeah, so in my territory specifically, I'll let Vince speak for his. The Cotton Jassid is basically a new invasive pest that's originally from India. I think as of 2023, we saw instances of Jassid in Costa Rica. 2024, it kind of moved into South Florida. And we were expecting to see it in 2025, but not at the level that we saw it. We had no idea that pressure was going to be as devastating as it was. So the Cotton Jassid specifically is just a small leafhopper. We can distinguish adults from other leafhoppers basically because of two spots on the backs of its wings. So another name for Cotton Jassid would be two-spotted leafhopper. But as of 2025, I think the first instance in Georgia where we identified Cotton Jassid was in Decatur County around July 9th, I believe. So given that, what we saw a lot of pressure in ochre at the time, and it quickly moved to cotton. And before the end of the season, I'd say September, October, we basically had Cotton Jassid pressure across the whole geography where cotton is planted. I'd say on average, we made applications on the insect probably on average of 2 sprays during the season. Down to Florida, North Florida area, South Georgia, we made upwards of 6 applications. And given the yield loss that we saw, I think we saw in some cases 2 applications, there was a difference of 1,200 pounds of lint yield. So definitely a devastating insect. So ever since then, last year was more of a learning curve on this insect, and we're still learning a lot about it. We have identified Cotton Jassid in 2026 as of 2 weeks ago, I believe, in Tifton. I know Vince got some areas in Alabama they've identified as well as in Florida. But we feel like we're on the same track, same timeline as we were last year, just based on the numbers that we're seeing now. And over the last couple of weeks, we've identified more in Georgia just sporadically occurring in cotton based on some conversations I've had with consultants. So not really a lot to add to that as far as what we're seeing. We still have a lot to learn. Like I said, we've seen one season's worth of insect pressure with this specific insect, so there's a lot to learn. But we do feel like we're probably going to follow that same path that we did last year as far as when they're coming in and the pressure that we're going to see.
Yeah, I don't have a whole lot to add. Obviously, Eddie did a really good job of describing the pests and the biology and kind of what we saw last year. We did pick up cotton jassid in cotton in Tallahassee, Alabama, about a week ahead of when we saw it last year. Followed pretty closely by finding it in Headland, Alabama, which again followed the pattern from last year, and then not long after that in cotton in Quincy, Florida. So, it, you know, we always ask, where are we at on this train relative to where we were in the past, and maybe next year we'll be able to answer that question because be perfectly honest with you, we're finding cotton jassids on ornamental plants in areas that is this a problem? Is it an issue? Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. They may have been the same place, same time there last year, but really nobody was looking. So again, a lot of things to learn. To Eddie's point, by the time a lot of trials got put into the system, it was just too far gone, and so they gathered a bunch of really good data and really good information, and identified a lot of products that had some activity on this pest. And we're just in the infancy of discovering what we need to know about this particular insect.
So do we think, or does the world think that these are resident insects, or are they moving from south to north, or we have some idea of that?
Well, they don't overwinter in our conditions. I mean, we have cool enough winters to knock down most of the adults. But what we have seen is in South Florida, in that tropical environment, it seems that just through conversation that they never left. So I would predict that it's going to be one of those environmental pests that have to move up through the geography to become established. So they're definitely not going to overwinter. But I think we have enough host crops in South Florida. We've got native cotton, we've got okra, we've got sunflowers, eggplants, other cropping systems that will harbor these insects. So I would think of something as similar like whiteflies, where they move in every year.
Yeah.
So
As I was reading about it, and studying it, being a cotton entomologist, I had to follow these issues out of curiosity, if no other reason. But it looked like they had been identified in that sort of range of about where cotton would overwinter, which is irrelevant really because cotton's not planted down there very much, but it's sort of leaning toward those tropical kind of environments. And this far north, we don't get a lot of survival, if any. I know last year they identified some at one of the research stations about the latitude of Jackson, Mississippi, but
right.
in the state of Mississippi, but I assume those were ones that had moved in the process.
UGA and Dr. Philip Roberts, and I know Scott Graham at Auburn as well has been well. They've set sticky trap cards out throughout the season. So I will say this: even though we have cold winters, I think the last jassid we identified was in January, and we had a lull between January and April. And I think the first one actually identified this year was in April, but none really established in a crop up until June. So there was some lingering around during the wintertime, but the pressure and the abundance and the population that we need to cause problems, I think, is definitely mitigated by a lot of the cold weather we get.
Yeah, that's a piece of good news. But when they do establish, y'all, if you can, describe the damage to me because and the scouting or what steps have been taken to identify and help growers and consultants with the problem.
So as in mostly phosphor species, you can see symptomology such as hopper burn. And what we've noticed with these insects is usually they start feeding on the outside of the field, so the borders. Any open areas in the field, so pivoted tracks, or you have skips in the field, that's where they initially start to congregate on the plant. And I guess those first symptoms, you can pull the leaf back and look at the underside, and usually there'll be a population of adults and nymphs, but that hopper burn is pretty characteristic of these insects. So you'll see some chlorosis, some cupping, which those leaves will undercup to some degree, and they usually start in the top of the plant. So that's kind of the key indicator. As far as thresholds go, we started out with a higher threshold, I think around 4 nymphs on the 4th leaf down on the plant. Through a lot of the assessments Dr. Roberts did last year and some of the other entomologists across the Southeast, I think that threshold is down to 1 nymph per leaf on that 4th leaf down. So basically, we start to see some presence of Jassid. That's going to initiate an application.
Yeah, and I think that one of the or an issue in some parts of our geography is we're very fortunate in most of the core cotton growing areas in Georgia and really southeast Alabama. We've got pretty good coverage with a good group of consultants, and there are, however, some areas that we grow cotton in, significant amount of cotton that consultants are few and far between. And this is an insect that you are going to have to scout for. Most of the time, when you see the damage, it is probably too late. And so that's a concern in certain parts of the geography. I think every consultant that if he hadn't lived under a rock for the last year and a half has probably had a really good education on Jazzid, how to identify it, the importance of scouting, and again making those applications when you get to that threshold.
Yeah, that seemed to be the consensus of what I was reading in a lot of the literature and stuff. Was awareness was at least as big an issue as any other part of the system. Because you think about cotton and cotton entomology, awareness has always been the key point. And I think that's why we're having this conversation today, is trying to get the word out. Not that we have all the answers, but we certainly can help spread the word and let folks that it might not be scouting as often as needed get out and take some proactive moves to get ahead of the problem in the event it presents itself.
I was just going to say, one of the things that Eddie mentioned, that obviously like a lot of other insect pests, thinking about the field edges, field borders, pivot tracks, again, breaks in the field. I mean, that seems to be where they really like to start. So, even hopefully, if you're not dealing with a consultant, you don't have somebody, looking at your crop on a regular basis. I mean, if you get a population, it should be fairly easy to be able to pick it up.
Yeah, and that was my next question, was when you identify those populations that are at damaging, levels or exceed thresholds, which everybody ought to do, what do you do about it? And, I would caution everybody, realize you got to follow the labels. You need to find label pesticides and all of that. But what are the options when those things do occur?
Yeah, so I'll probably start out by saying this, and I said something about hopper burn and those symptoms that you see. So I think it's even more important to identify the insect first before you see the damage, because what we've seen in the past is once you start seeing that hopper burn, even though you make an application, which is what we're about to discuss, you still see progression of those symptoms. So if you have hopper burn across the field, you can expect those symptoms to progress even after an application. So it's really important to make an application on threshold, which is 1 nymph per leaf on that 4th leaf down. So I think that threshold's definitely
And that's for
very,
Georgia? That's Georgia's threshold?
yes. So that's very important to make an application on that threshold to mitigate any issues that you see from that damage. No, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, it's interesting to me that hopper burn is not an unfamiliar term to the farming or ag world, but it's typically, in history, it's been associated with soybeans in the Midwest, where they would see hopper burn. I mean, this may be a new insect for the U.S., it certainly is, but it's not a uncommon phenomenon. It's existed in various crops over time.
Yes, and we see hopper burn and crops like peanuts from potato leaf hopper, but you know we don't. I'm not privy to all the ins and outs of what the toxin may be that come from these insects. But what we've seen, and I know Vint can attest to this from Alabama, but you will see some basically necrosis of that leaf and premature defoliation if it gets bad enough. Isn't that right, Vint? From what y'all saw in Alabama.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we saw some fields completely defoliated, and again, one of the first trials that I was privy to, made applications on a Thursday, And by Monday, the field was basically, or Tuesday, the field was basically completely defoliated and absolutely no difference at all among any of the treatments at each point. Just because you're going to make an application doesn't mean the symptoms and the severity of it is going to progress moving forward. And, that threshold that Eddie quoted in for Georgia is the same threshold they utilize in Alabama, the same one they use in Florida as well.
The potential for damage leads the insect numbers a little bit. You got all the slack in the system, and you got to find them, get the insecticide together, get the program, and get the plan in place. And doing that as early as possible is critical to intercepting the damage potential. It sounds like y'all are saying.
Absolutely, and I guess one of the mitigating factors that we think about in controlling this insect is all the other things that we deal with, whether those are plant bugs, stink bugs, whatever they may be, and so I think there are a lot of products that have some activity on cotton jassid, and I think they all have their place in the system.
Yeah, I would point out to the audience, this is almost an aside, but we've got new varieties that have very exciting potentials. A lot of those varieties contain Thrive-On. Thrive-On is not active against adult plant bugs on much of any level. If you have adult plant bugs that move in the field that exceed, or you have any plant bugs that move or exist in the field above threshold, they have to be treated. And I think it would be a good point or a good place to point that out and consider the Jassid as part of the system you're out scouting and trying to manage and identify.
Yeah, and probably be a good idea to point out that Thrive-On technology has no activity on this particular insect that we're discussing.
Yes, very good point. I love having other bug people on the phone with me. So when you find them, what do we have for options that we know are, that are labeled currently for use as far as products in your geographies?
There's a plethora of products, and as Vint said, the product of choice would be based on the insect pressure that you have in the field, whether it be plant bugs, stink bugs, jassids, whiteflies, or whatnot. Bayer does have a product where we have a new 2EE label for leafhoppers in cotton called Savanto Prime, and Savanto Prime is not a new chemistry by any means. And it's been a great whitefly material for us in the Southeast because we deal with a lot of whitefly problems in Southwest Georgia, particularly around our fruit and veg areas where we have that transition from fruit and veg to cotton. And we can name a ton of different chemistries, but Savanto in particularly, a lot of preliminary data from last year showed that if you spray on, and of course, Savanto's real fit would be in our early application in cotton. Savanto is fairly safe on pollinators compared to some of these other chemistries that we're using in the environment, as well as Savanto being placed in a window where you have a lot of whitefly pressure among jassids as well. Given the pressure that we saw last year, and in most cases, if we have the right environment, you're going to have jassids and whiteflies in the field at the same time in those specific areas where we have those issues. Outside of those windows, we have stink bugs and plant bugs, as I mentioned. There's other products of choice for that as well. Savanto is one of the better products for jassid in particular. Given the data from Dr. Roberts, UGA, as well as some of our work, and I think Scott Graham has done some work with Savanto as well.
Yeah, you really have to consider the complex that you're dealing with in the field and make sure all your applications are, acceptable for that purpose.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that I guess they've learned from other parts of the world that it seems that this little critter has a really strong propensity to develop resistance to classes of chemistry, which you would expect. So one of the things that our academic community is really preaching is using a diverse mix of products through the season, trying to rotate those products, keep them efficacious as long as possible. So there's and I've asked the question, what percentage of the cotton do they think will be sprayed for cotton jassid in 2026? And first thing Philip Roberts told me was 75% of the acres in the coastal plains. And I think Scott Graham at Auburn basically echoed those comments. But, one of the things that, and I don't know that it's going to cause any issues or problems, but we've got cotton that that is, in the second week of bloom. We've got cotton that is just coming out of the ground, and everything in between. So there's going to be a really diversity of the age of the crop that we're dealing with across our geography, and primarily, due to weather factors.
Yeah, this sounds like it's building toward later planted cotton could severely be threatened by it if you're not aware of the problem and out trying to get ahead of it.
That's a great point. Maturity of cotton definitely matters. I mean, they're earlier planted, it's probably going to be less impacted. Later planted, definitely we can see upwards of, I won't say 100% yield loss. In the areas such as India where they've had this issue, they have seen upwards of 100% yield loss. So, like last year, we had I think there were some research trials down in Florida, between the untreated and the treated was a 1,200-pound difference. So it can be very impactful based on that maturity. But what we did see last year, it seemed that Jassids were attracted to the older cotton first. So it did seem like they went to the more mature cotton before they went to the younger cotton. We don't really know why, but looking through literature, it seems that they may be attracted to some of the, I guess, I don't know how you explain it. I guess it would be the degradatory levels of the plant. So they're attracted to something, maybe some lower or deficiencies in the plant. I don't really why they're attracted to the older cotton, but they went to the older cotton first. So there is that. But it also transferred into the younger cotton as we move forward throughout the season. So, but I would caution people. We're talking about these products that may be efficacious on Jassid. A lot of these products that we're discussing outside of Savanto, because we do have a 2EE label, but there are other products that were used in research trials. Make sure they have a specific label for Jassid, because I don't know if they do, but through some of the research done on site, that's what we're talking about efficacy here. So that I don't know if some of these companies have went as far as we have to get a 2EE label for that specific insect. So
yeah, there could be incidental control from plant bug applications or white flies or something, but we do need to read and follow all the label directions. So,
and Eddie's pointed out, obviously coming in on the front end of this product, when we start to reach threshold of try and maximize residuals is obviously a really good time and fit for a product like Savanto Prime. But I also think that later in the season is probably a really good fit as well. When we get to the point that maybe we're through with plant bugs, maybe we've moved beyond stink bugs, and maybe there are a few white flies around, and we're trying to protect foliage, to be able to finish up a crop. Maybe those are the two insects you're dealing with. That'd be another really good fit for a product like Savanto.
yeah, it sounds like awareness is the word of the day, and everything's pretty dynamic and flowing. I guess cotton entomology, man, at least for my career, has always been like that. We always have some issue that seems to pop up and present us with a new challenge. But it sounds like also the scientific body is moving that direction and getting us some answers. So that's refreshing.
I was going to say, I think I've heard that, about 90% of what our southern entomologists, or at least in Georgia, Florida, and Alabama, are going to be working on this year is Cotton Jassid. And I said, well, what if they don't show up? I said, well, I guess we'll spend a lot of time at the lake or the river or the beach or whatever. But they are gearing up in a big way to gain as much knowledge and information as they can in 1 year on this particular pest.
Makes my heart smile a little bit to know we still got that sort of motivation in entomology. People want to study bugs. So sounds like we've kind of covered most of the topic about Cotton Jassids. Y'all have any closing comments other than awareness and keep your guard up?
just reiterate the fact that scouting is more important this year than it ever has been. The way these insects populate and reproduce, they can drastically increase population in just a few weeks. So I would say just your scout, your consultant is worth its weight in gold this year just to be ahead of this issue.
Yeah, and I'd echo that comment. Obviously, I've heard it said at meetings, if you've never scouted your cotton before, or you don't have somebody looking at it, this is a year to do it. So, I just reiterate what we said earlier. You know what? When you if you're waiting for symptomology to appear, then you're probably on the bad side of the curve.
Sounds like that's a consensus, and that's what we plan to do here at Scott. I would add, we've not found any at Scott, but you do have somebody here, me mainly, that calls himself an entomologist that is keenly aware of the need to scout, and we're out looking. And we'll keep the audience updated if we find any.
Well, I was just going to say, I don't consider myself an entomologist by any means, but I did actually buy some hibiscus plants and put on my back patio so that I get to see those things 2 or 3 times a day. And so far, no jazzes, but even I know a weed guy like me is looking for them.
That is a good idea. I may have to go find my wife some hibiscus plants this afternoon. She'd be tickled by it, but I could use them for my own little trap crop monitoring process too. That's a good idea. Thank you.
A little backyard okra wouldn't hurt either, Jay.
That's not a bad idea. I know where there's some commercial okra fields around. That is a very good idea, actually. That's why we do this podcast, to share tips, helpful tips. So, sounds like we've kind of discussed the topic. Are there any other particular agronomics y'all'd like to add a few minutes about for your regions? I'm always wanting to reinforce the PGR message because it's time for that. It's time to be out scouting. All of this combines into a system where we need to keep our hand on the agronomics and the insect components going on in the field. But y'all feel free to add whatever you'd like for your individual geography. And then I want to talk a little bit about some learning center data.
Well, I mentioned this earlier, and cotton farmers are pretty regimented guys, and they like to plant in a certain window, and hopefully Mother Nature cooperates, and by and large it does. But this is a year where we're going to have cotton of every age, sometimes in the same field. Management is going to be a much trickier situation this year than it has been in the past. We've had areas that have received 17, 18 inches of rain in the last 10 days. And, what cotton is not underwater looks really good. But there's going to be growers that are going to be making a bunch of different applications at a bunch of different times on this cotton crop. So that's probably a level of concern. And it's going to make PGR management a little bit more difficult.
I would add to that, we're very excited about new varieties and new technology like Thrive On. We've got some really, really good genetics that are moving forward. They've got more powerful pest control tools built into them than I thought I'd ever see in my lifetime. But you still got to get down to the fact of none of that matters if we don't optimize the agronomics and accumulate yield potential the way it needs to be accumulated. And PGRs are one of the critical components of that. If any of us on here can help you, give us a call, get in touch with us. We characterize varieties and talk about PGRs till folks get tired of it sometimes around Scott. And I don't mean to imply that all of that applies directly to you in Georgia or Alabama, but the concepts do. And we can help talk through that and try to apply a practical level of management to an individual field for an individual customer that would like that. I hope that's one of the services that we can provide as a company and as a group. So with that, I want to discuss one thing from the Learning Center. And this was a request made from the previous few podcasts. People ask us about data and about some of the curiosities that we've evaluated over time. And I know both of y'all have seen me give a presentation about PGRs and Locule numbers in cotton and all of those things. And I just explained to the audience, and I want to ask y'all a question before I tell you what I found in the data. From what y'all have seen and all of that, is a 5-lock boll bigger than a 4-lock boll? I want to ask y'all the question before I get into the data because I summarized some of the data roughly the other day. And y'all have seen parts of this presentation, but from data and from experience and conversations in the field, does the cotton industry think a 5-lock boll is bigger than a 4-lock boll in weight or contribution to yield?
Well, I think it is, Jay.
I think probably the prevailing thought process is that it's not, but I believe it is.
Well, have I got a deal for you? In 2016, it turns out, we started to notice that there was some differentiation in treatments and varieties and so forth and so on in the number of 5-lock bolls we saw versus 4-lock bolls. And I've asked this question through my career probably a few dozen times Tom Kirby, I asked him who knows how many times. Dr. Tom Kirby was my boss at Delta Pine, and I asked him a dozen times. And we never really got to a good answer. But I challenged my crew in 2016 to help me sample some plots and varieties and so forth. And we actually box mapped these using a tool that I developed here we call the bollometer. We box mapped them by position on the plant as to whether they had 4 or 5 locules in each boll on the plant. Then we lumped those together, and I sent them to the gin and had them gin. So I had turnout, I had lint contribution, I had the number of seeds in a boll, which lets you calculate the number of seeds in a locule. It's a really cool piece of science, I think, today. So y'all take a guess at how many total bolls we mapped in that effort from 2016 to 2025. And this is
50,000.
This is not all the bolls we've mapped. This is just how many we mapped doing this.
50,000.
Eddie?
75,000.
60,605. That's how many I found in the data. And I might have missed one, but I think this is pretty accurate. Of those, there were 46,320 of those were 4 locule, and 14,285 were 5 locule. That's a pretty good sample by anybody's measure, I think. That means that 23.6% of the bolls that we mapped had 5 locules. I just cut the suspense. The turnout was basically identical across the range of them. It might have been 0.1% off, something like that. The fiber qualities were similar between 4 and 5 locule bolls. But the real difference was a 4 locule boll across that 60,605 bolls. A 4 locule boll weighed in seed cotton weight, which is seed and lint together, and trash, was 3.79 grams per boll. In the 5 lock bolls, they weighed 4.76 grams per boll, which means they measured to be 25.8% heavier. I get into a debate every winter about this, which is part of why I do it, to have the conversation and get people to talk, that, it's not heavier. A 5's not heavier than a 4. It doesn't contribute more than a 4. I think we've pretty well sewn that answer up. What do y'all think?
I'd say it's pretty concise, clear evidence that it does weigh more.
And it's pretty well, and it follows through in lint, follows through in everything else. Now, the next question is, what does that matter? And truthfully, this is the basis of any resistance I might ever get to it. They say it doesn't matter if I make the yield, and that's exactly correct. However, it's interesting to me that there is a varietal agronomic management interaction that occurs. And by that, I mean, as we manage these fields better or more appropriately, we redirect energy as we should using PGRs and or population and row spacing and all of that. We tend to increase the number of bolls that keep that 5th locule, because what basically happens is most bolls form as 5 locule. If energy is not available to that boll about 30 days, 28 days pre-bloom, it drops the 4th locule or the 5th locule and keeps the 4. And if you think about what that means, that's flex in cotton, kind of like corn. We know corn varies the size of the ear based on the relative productivity of the field early in the corn's life cycle. The challenge is that corn blooms once in 7 or 8 days, 9 days. Cotton blooms 100 times over 100 days in a lot of cases. So what relevance does that have in the field? It's really a curiosity that borders on kind of a plant productivity, a relative measure of plant productivity. If you don't have them, it's not the end of the world, and we're not saying that. But if you do have them, it's probably a good sign. And it's really curious to me that some of the newer varieties we have seem to have a lot of them. Delta Pine 2537, last year, we measured it to have more than any of the other varieties that we mapped. So that's one of its yield components. It's interesting, though, that 2333, which is one of our biggest products we sell today, typically has less than most other varieties. So what that says is there's more than one way to get the right answer, because there's no dispute that 2333 is a very, very successful variety for all the right reasons. But this is just a cotton curiosity for you today. I wanted to talk a little bit about Learning Center data and what we've observed. And anybody that's interested, come see us. Y'all got closing comments before we wrap today up?
Well, the only thing I would say, Jay, is again, I appreciate you doing this. Appreciate, hopefully raising the awareness of an emerging pest that we're encountering in the environment, and hopefully just some pointers on what needs to be done to be able to manage this thing effectively and continue to produce good cotton crops and hopefully making profits moving forward. So the awareness part of it, again, is a real critical component of being successful.
Yeah, and I appreciate you having us on, Jay. And I know we've really spoke more about our specific geographies, but from an awareness standpoint, we've talked about different host crops for jassy, such as hibiscus. A lot of hibiscus that gets shipped across the U.S. From an ornamental standpoint. I would just, even if you're outside of a geography that's known to have jassy as of last year, I'd still be adamant about scouting, identifying those insects in those areas because, like we saw last year, once they get established, it can be a very expedited situation as far as management across a large geography. So I would just caution everybody to not be too lax on that and scout those fields and make sure that you don't have those issues moving forward throughout the season.
That sounds like the best advice of all. And I sincerely appreciate all y'all joining us this morning and having this conversation. We're always trying to do something entertaining and helpful, utilitarian, I guess, for the cotton industry. So if you have questions or comments, give one of us a call, send us an email. All the data from the Learning Center is available to you. We got a full research program in the field, and we would invite you to come see us. And thank you for listening today. And I guess with that, we'll see you down the road.